And well, for more on this, we're now being joined by Edward P. Joseph from Washington, D.C. Edward is a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins University. Thank you so much for taking our time and joining us on World DNS. Now, more than 15,000 children have been killed in Gaza since the war began. Now, this UN list is also known as the list of shame. What kind of practical implications or perhaps consequences will this have in the ongoing war in Gaza?
Well, it remains to be seen whether there will be any practical consequences. This is not the first time, of course, that the United Nations or senior officials within the United Nations have sharply criticized Israel. And the conduct of the war, of course, continues. So it's not really clear what the impact of this listing would be, nor is it clear exactly what the details are, as your report indicated, what the United Nations actually says are the allegations about Israeli conduct. And of course, from the Israeli perspective, you have their viewpoint that it is Hamas that embeds itself with the civilian population that includes children, which then, of course, complicates and raises the question of whether or not there's compliance or lack of compliance with international humanitarian law. So those are all questions that are outstanding. And really, the wider question here is what to do to actually stop the fighting. But we can talk about that shortly. Please.
Right. Mr. Joseph, speak of how the outcome and the implications in the ongoing war remains uncertain. But one thing is certain at this moment is beyond naming and shaming countries, which is one of the basis of this report. What perhaps is the best case scenario to come out of this report?
Well, the best case scenario, and I think there should be universal agreement with this, is to stop the war. That is the best case scenario. But then the irony here is why the United Nations Secretary General doesn't join his voice instead of in this direction of angling yet another criticism to Israel, which, of course, there's already an enormous amount of criticism in various UN bodies. But rather, why doesn't the United Nations Secretary General lend his voice to that of Qatar, of Egypt, of the United States, of the G7, and call on Hamas to accept the ceasefire plan, which includes the permanent cessation of hostilities that Hamas has been demanding all along? And that's really the irony here, why there isn't more focus on that. That report, the details of that, apparently and reportedly, according to President Biden and others, has been accepted by Israel's war cabinet, despite opposition, even with the wider Israeli government. It has been accepted. Prime Minister Netanyahu has not said that he rejects this agreement, and it is now within Hamas's court to accept this. And this is where the focus should be, on ending the fighting, ending the deaths of Palestinian children, of women, and of civilian men. So that's really the irony here, and that's really where the focus should be, is on asking the question of why Hamas does not accept this well put together, detailed agreement that meets their demands. Please.
Right, Mr. Joseph, of course, the suffering of women and children is at the center of concerns around the world in the ongoing war in Gaza. Let's also talk about Israel's reaction on its listing, on the UN blacklisting. Well, Israel's foreign minister has said that this decision will have an impact on Israel's relations with the UN. Can you tell us more about that, with Netanyahu calling the IDF one of the most moral militaries in the world?
Actually, there's little really of consequence to add here. Israel has very antagonistic relations and has had antagonistic relations with the United Nations for decades, ever since there were some highly questionable resolutions passed decades ago. Israel, of course, is highly critical and highly suspicious of the specialized UN agency, the only one that exists, that is dedicated for a single refugee population, and that is the Palestinian refugee population and UNRWA. So there's nothing really new here. The Israelis do not trust the UN. They reject these calls. And again, the irony here is that the United Nations Secretary General should be pointing and, again, adding his voice. This is not just the United States. This is Qatar and Egypt that have been key mediators and that have said that the Israelis have accepted this agreement to stop the fighting. So that's the agreement. And I call your attention here to the well-known Washington Post columnist, David Ignatius, who asked the question. Here's a blunt question, quote, why aren't Palestinians demanding that Hamas's leaders who are hiding in tunnels under the ravaged enclave accept this agreement so that reconstruction can begin? In fact, it's not just a cessation of hostilities. The agreement provides, as columnist David Ignatius points out, who has excellent sources in the U.S. administration, points out that reconstruction would begin immediately. So all of us who are concerned about the suffering Palestinians, instead of being focused on these mutual recriminations between Israel and the United Nations, should be focused on getting Hamas to finally accept this deal that will give the Palestinian population the relief that it desperately needs. Please.
Right, Mr. Joseph, thank you so much for taking out time and joining us here on the show with your insights.
You're welcome.